Yeah, I'm Dave Little. I'm from the Institute of Aquaculture at the University of Stirling in Scotland, and I coordinate a European Framework 7 research project that's looking at sustaining aquaculture, ethical aquaculture trade that has grown up between Asia and Europe. Well, actually, it's making up an increasing proportion of what we eat in Europe. Europe only meets around half of its overall seafood needs from its own fishing, from its own stocks of fishing and aquaculture. And it relies on going out and catching fish in other people's waters and buying in farmed aquatic products for the rest of the world. So it's important already and it's growing. Shrimp led the way. Probably about 25% of the farm shrimp imported into Europe comes from Asia, farm shrimp. And you know, there's 200,000 tons of Pangasius alone that's coming into Europe now. So it's not inconsiderate, a lot of it. I mean, the regulations globally are getting more strict. I mean, they started with the basic food hygiene that you know, is pretty much in place now. But of course, consumers are looking for other values as well, particularly with all the negative media attention on, you know, on some of the practices that have previously been used in aquaculture around the world, not least in Europe itself. So there's a bit of a spotlight on, is eating farm seafood a good thing? How sustainable is it? And what we're trying to do is, in our project, is we're trying to actually get to the bottom of that. We're trying to actually research what the systems are like at the moment, what are the trajectories of change. It's not just the farm, it's the value chain. You know, the farmer's one person in that value chain, but there are other people, often very poor people, who benefit from aquaculture in Asia and therefore through this trade. So it's in many people's interest. Europeans get seafood that's affordable and good quality. And in the Asian part of the food chain, there's sometimes quite amazing transformations of areas where aquaculture is now established. Yeah, it's great. It's great, the conferences in Asia, because this is where most of the aquatic food is farmed in the world, over 90%. So it's, you know, for the 10th anniversary, I think it's not beyond time that it's been held here. And we particularly like, because our project's in Asia, and it meant we could bring in Asian speakers to our meeting quite cost effectively. And I think it was shown by that session how many questions people had for them. There's a lot of innovation going on in the private sector here in Asia. It's not just about international NGOs coming in and telling how it should be. These people have their own vision of sustainability, and we wanted to hear it. Sustainability, what is it? It's a journey, you know. Things are going to be better than they are now. And the question is, how quickly do things change depend on a whole bunch of factors. To me, one of the really exciting areas is just how much change has already happened just in the last 5 years, and the impacts of that change. Things like, you know, we think of a shrimp or a fish that's produced in Asia. Well, by the time it comes to Europe in our supermarkets and on our plates, it's already processed. That processing means that actually most of the animal stays in Asia, and there's a job for someone to process it in Asia. What are we doing that? Well, the Vietnamese, the Thais, the Bangladeshis, the Chinese, they're doing all sorts of things with those byproducts. They're turning them into other food stocks for other animals. This is exciting stuff. This is really about sustainability, not looked narrowly through the eyes of, is shrimp sustainable, but is the food system sustainable? Big question. I think, first of all, you know, the change may happen in one part of the chain and the impact may be felt somewhere else. I mean, there's a lot of tension at the moment over just feed prices. All these farmers, or many of the farmers of these products are having to buy feed on the world market, basically. So what's happening in food prices in North America and Brazil have as much impact on them as people who buy those products as feeds to feed their shrimp and fish than anything else. A lot of these factors are outside their control. So they're part of a global food system. They're part of global food chains, and they're having to find their part in that play, in that situation. And there's going to be people who drop out, and there's going to be people who go on and innovate more. And I think that's one of the exciting things. We see lots and lots of innovation that's not, not coming down from universities actually. It's often amongst the farmers themselves. Particularly we see in the Surat Shrimp Club that we've just heard from. Amazing social learning amongst people who are trying to overcome their problems, trying to get better, trying to get more sustainable, and of course trying to make money. And that's a driver for these people. So understanding those processes and seeing how those successes can be used elsewhere, I think is really something that we should strive to do in the next 5 to 10 years. Well, we've had good support from the European 7th Framework so far. We can only do what we're funded to do. We're a government organisation, we're a university. We'd love to stay in the game, and we certainly like doing the work. I think one interesting thing is just how, for all of the change we've seen, there's people who come to this show who their whole business is around tuna, or they're not quite making the move into farmed fish and shrimp at quite the rate I would like to see. But of course that's about consumer perceptions. Consumers want to eat tuna. I think what's happened in North American markets with the incredible growth of tilapia into the top 5 is a blueprint really for what could happen in Europe. But we've got to get the quality right. We've got to make sure consumers not only think it tastes good, but also that it's got good qualities of sustainability. So these are things I've been having really interesting conversations with. Not so much presentations, but just meeting folks, sitting down, having a cup of coffee, and really chewing the fat, with people who are in the industry and sharing ideas. That's been great. Well, and every country's different. In Thailand, they've got our project's been not just working in Surat, it's been working in all the major shrimp growing areas, and really, we can't find any antibiotic use now in shrimp. It doesn't work, frankly, for most of the problems shrimp has. Antibiotics never worked. So they've really they focused back on the animal and improved the environment of the animal. They've really looked at biosecurity, so they're bringing in clean small shrimp to stop the systems. So they're screening for disease. If there's disease in the breeding animals or the small shrimp, they don't stop them. So there's a sort of a whole understanding of how to do shrimp farming that you heard something about just now that is resulting in more predictable outcomes from these intensive systems. But that's not all shrimp farming. There are extensive systems that we're seeing, there's disease in those systems, but the animals are strong. They're natural, essentially free-range systems, even if they're not technically organic. What's really missing out is that middle bit where people tried to intensify but didn't really do it very well. And there's 2 ways to go. You either extensify and fit it with the environment in the way that Jens Carl's explained, or you really have to get intensive and go for biosecurity. I think they're the 2 directions we see with shrimp. In terms of assurance for consumers, well, what qualities are you interested in? You don't want to get sick, right? Well, that's covered pretty well now, both for in HACCP procedures. So, at farm level through to processing level and all the steps, this is covered by international agreements. So, what are the other values perhaps you're worried about? You may be worried that the Burmese workers on Thai shrimp farms aren't being well treated. Well, there's no evidence for that. Usually, if you're a businessman, you have to look after in a labour short environment, you have to look after your staff. And again, this is an area that's covered increasingly by various certification schemes. We've looked at things like impacts on the communities, not just the shrimp producers, but other people in those communities. What do they think? Well, there's been an overall increase in benefits very often in these coastal areas, which were formerly often very poor. And what you see is there's been a gradual uplifting. Now, that's not to say there's no losers, but many of the people who've dropped out of shrimp farming, maybe, as Sarupon said, maybe 50% of people are still doing shrimp farming from 30 years ago. How many people are still growing wheat in the Midwest from 50 years ago? Agriculture, food production is about how you develop your skills. Some people are more naturally inclined than others. Some people have more suitable land than others. And so one would expect there to be a drop. Now what happens to those people is interesting, and one of the things our research project is trying to follow up on. We're looking at, if people have been in the system, in the sector and dropped out, why? What are they doing now and how are they benefiting? These are tropical animals, so you can't really grow them at ambient temperatures in Europe. So if we look at the major species that we're looking at, the major products, we're looking at, two types of shrimp, basically black tiger and white shrimp. We're looking at tilapia, look at pangasius. All of these animals, show them a bit of a European winter, they wouldn't survive. The way free trade works is you do what you do best and you compete on a global market. So that's why we don't see coffee grown in North America, why we don't see cocoa plants in Europe, because those plants are tropical plants. They grow very well in the tropics under ambient conditions. Now, we can set up a hothouse and grow them in North America, but think of the environmental burdens that you'd need to incur just to heat the building. So this is the basis of the economic advantage, the comparative advantage for certain crops, certain food crops, to grow in the tropics. Now, look at it another way. North America is very well endowed with a climate to grow wheat, to grow soybean. Wheat and soybean don't grow well in tropical countries, or as well. So this is the way global trade works. If we want to eat wheat, soy, and fish products, we have to share. We have to have global trade. Yeah. I think the point is that local food is almost becoming a mantra in Europe and North America, which is great. But local doesn't always mean more environmentally benign. Right. You can grow tomatoes in hot houses, and it's actually better if you do all the sums to grow them in a hot country and bring them in. Okay? But we like the idea of it being grown by a friend just down the road. That's good. We like the idea of fish coming in offshore. I think the reality is that we are exposed to global trade. We don't buy cars made in the garage down the road. We buy them for wherever's cheapest. Now, we may choose to pay more to get our garment made in the local town or our car put together in a local factory. But that's all about cost and it's about choice. And certainly most local food can come with a higher price tag. Now, if that's our choice, fine. We should have that choice. But let's not deny people who don't have so much income in Europe and North America that they can get wholesome food that comes a long, long way away. They can get wholesome food produced in an ethical way that gives them something they can afford and gives a livelihood to someone in a poorer producer country to produce that product. I think that's really about what fair trade is really about. You trust your brand. That's what's happening. You don't buy any old tilapia, you buy the one that's branded, and they do the work. They check compliance and they check the value chain. And what we heard from our French guy, Jean-Charles, who's working in Vietnam, is just how important that is. If you've built that relationship, you've got people who are making sure that you've got good compliance on agreed standards. It reduces all those rejections, it reduces all those losses, which are terrible for sustainability. And that then leads to that sort of mutual understanding that, I'm a producer, you're a buyer, we've got to understand each other. We've got to understand how we produce something, to what standard, in what way, so that we're satisfied. And the trade can continue. It's about trust. Now, in this global world, when, Americans dealing with Vietnamese or whatever, what we need is people who can work across those cultures. And that's what we see in the seafood business. It's not perfect, but it's getting a lot better. And you saw that from the graphs that were presented by Jean-Charles. I think, some of the people we've worked with who have built brands around Asian seafood, whether it's Highlander, for instance, who the people who sponsor this course, whether it's GrowBest, they're all big buyers in Asia. They have very high standards. And the shops they sell them to would not be buying that unless they were monitoring every step of the way. Just to tag everything with a bad label, it's just not the way to do it. there are this fantastic diversity of aquaculture systems here in Asia, and you know, if you like food, find out about them. Find out about the difference that shrimp that come out of intensive systems versus ones that are less intensive. Find out about where these animals live in ecosystems so that you're not prone to rash judgments that this is bad for the environment. Many of the species that are being grown in Asia for sale in North America and Europe feed low in the food chain. That means that they tread lightly on the earth in terms of the impacts. Many are omnivorous or herbivorous. So these are good choices. If you're really concerned about living and eating sustainably, these are good choices. Tilapia's in the top 5.
Yeah.
North America has totally changed. And Pangasius, look at the fight. Pangasius, the Vietnamese, the catfish wars with America. Okay, now things have settled down. There's a proper terms of trade. And what's happening? That product's competing very well in the top 10 already. And it will go higher. The one reason why Pangasius has done so well in Europe is it's a good product. It's competitive. It's an effective substitute for many much more expensive white fish products. That's the reason I think tilapia hasn't taken off, because Pangasius has come in. It's been so attractive. Now, not everyone wants to eat Pangasius. Some people think it's bland. But I've also stood next to supermarket, freezers and seen people say, pick it and say, I like this product. I like this product as much, if not better, than traditional cod and haddock. It's their choice. Supermarkets are selling it because people want choice and people buy it. Fair trade. I think the point is there's an awful lot of experience in catfish farming in Louisiana and Mississippi, and it's for them to look at where they fit in this global seafood chain. Can they grow if catfish can't compete on the same terms as Pangasius, for example? Maybe they need to look again at what they're growing and how they're growing it, how they're marketing it. But to me, this is the same issue with really any product. Are you competitive on beef? Are you competitive on soy, on corn? North America, no one can compete with North America on many crops because it's efficient. And those rules should apply across the board. So if America cannot compete in an open and an equal way on a certain crop, well then the crop goes somewhere else. And of course, what is Pangasius? It's a way of turning American soybean and other food raw materials into a value-added product and being sold back to Americans. So actually, look at it this way. Americans are eating their own products. It's just gone through Vietnam on the way back.